these conspiracy theories are being started by people who know probably that what they're saying is utter bull.
They have a problem with trust in government. They have a problem with trust in institutions.
People seem to basically think all establishment sources of power, whether it's media, science, politics, or whatever it is, are sort of part of a cabal that we're associated with these institutions and experts that they believe are in some way trying to mislead them. Before you watch today's episode, we want to remind you that tickets are on sale for the newsagent's live shows with HSBC UK. We're kicking off our tour at the Birmingham Symphony Hall on February the 17th, then we're off to the Bridgewater Hall in Manchester on February the 24th, and finally the Usher Hall in Edinburgh on March the 11th. Head over to Global Player to get your tickets for any of these dates, and the link will be in the description below. We are so excited to see all of you there.
We didn't expect to be talking to you about milk today, or indeed butter, but turns out we are, because it's become the latest front line in the culture wars, and people are really losing their shit.
Oh, why can't they stop messing with our food? It's getting silly now, guys. Milk, unbelievable milk.
Will have been recruited into an experiment with no choice whatsoever and no consent.
See what that is? Yeah. Arla, creeping down. You're going down the drain, mate.
Bovair is the product name. Interestingly, Bill Gates has just invested 100 million quid into a company that's producing the same product.
Well, in that case, folks, avoid it at all costs. All costs. If Bill Gates is involved, no, thank you very much.
What I told you, this is no longer allowed in our house.
Do not buy any Arla products. Do not buy from any suppliers who use Arla.
I mean, surely the best thing to do is have 2 aisles in the supermarket. So this is the aisle where you're part of an experiment and we're doing things to your cattle. This is the aisle where you can buy fresh milk and fresh meat that has not been altered with a chemical that you didn't consent to.
The climate lunatics are running wild, and some of them quite astonishingly hold positions to actually alter our food, and they are doing it. The next thing on the list is to reduce your fart emissions.
If this dark and evil conspiracy against all of us that eat dairy products has passed you by, we're going to try to explain what the hell it is all about. Because never has there been a case of less meeting the eye than it appears, but somehow it's taking hold. Welcome to the Newsagents. It's John.
It's Emily.
It's Lewis.
And before we get onto any of these details, which are obviously fascinating, can I ask you why you're both wearing dinner jackets?
We didn't invite
Well, did you
John.
not get the memo?
Well, okay, so for those who are not watching this on YouTube, Lewis is wearing a rather fetching velvet dinner jacket, and Emily, I think the French would say, a black smoking.
Well, she's on
Just
40
say I'm
Marlboro a day.
smoking.
Famously.
I'm actually wearing it for warmth, not least.
Right, okay.
Because I tend to underdress for this studio.
And you're
And I
doing
tend to
my
overdress
lesson.
for it. So
And you're doing the Valdunican Christmas special.
Correct. I don't know what you're talking about, but all right.
What else?
You're not going to start going on about Butch Cassidy again like you did yesterday, are you?
I'm just some widening your cultural
No,
references.
you are not. I'm afraid to break it to you, Lewis. You are not Butch Cassidy, nor the Sundance Kid.
Okay.
You can aspire, but we're not there
I
yet.
don't know what you're talking about, all right?
Anyway,
We've left you hanging because we promised you we were going to talk about milk and butter and all the things that it seems a TikTok craze has led to people pouring down the sink, pouring down the drain. Why? Because one food company, Arla Foods in the UK, has said that it would be trialling a new dairy feed additive on 30 UK farms. And it's an additive that would work to reduce methane in cows to help combat climate change. And people don't like that at all. Richard Tice has called it woke milk.
woke milk.
Woke milk, yes. So what is happening? Basically, online users have turned this into something that I guess we would call the beginnings, the feelings of a conspiracy theory. They've linked Bill Gates to it. Bill Gates is not connected to this at all. He has actually been part of a different dietary supplement called Ruminate, but it has nothing to do with Arla. Arla has defended the use of Bovir, that's the commercial name. It said that the cow feed supplement is safe and it has undergone testing and it has undergone trials, as we said. It's available for sale in 68 countries. It's been approved for use by the European Food Safety Authority, the UK Food Standards Agency, as well as the US Food and Drug Administration. So the big bodies that determine these things, the safety records, have all passed Bovir, but that hasn't stopped people deciding that essentially they're out to kill us.
And we should just add one thing, which is the reason why they're looking for this additive, because one of the great contributors to CO2 in the atmosphere is methane, cows farting, to put it at its crudest, and they're looking for ways to reduce CO2 emissions. It's a simple green objective. It's not to sell more milk, it's not to sell milk cheaper, it's not to dilute it, it's to make it so that the cows expel less methane out of their bottoms.
Because greenhouse gas is about 80 times more dangerous than CO2. So methane is 80 times more dangerous than CO2, and agriculture is 40% of it. So there is a problem, right? If you're interested in climate change, if you're interested in stopping climate change, if you're interested in remedies that presumably would not even be passed on to the customer, this is something that Arla is trying out with Bovir.
Yeah, so you'd think it would be good news. As Emily says, it's available in 68 countries already. Bovir, it works to suppress the enzymes in a cow's stomach that creates the methane. National Farmers Union has said when the additive is used as recommended, it breaks down the cow's digestive system, so they're in favour of it. And as part of this trial, Arla Foods has been working with some of the UK's biggest supermarkets, Tesco, Morrison's, Aldi, stocking products produced by cows which have eaten the additive. The reason it has suddenly become controversial, at least started to sort of break onto the political scene in Britain, is not least because of the newish Reform MP for Great Yarmouth, Rupert Lowe, one of the 5 Reform MPs, who has said on X that he has asked the Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA, to carry out an urgent review of the additive. At the same time as some of this social media stuff has been going on, some dairy farmers saying they will not use the feed, citing concerns over some of the compounds used to make the additive. Proponents of it are claiming that it is potentially corrosive to the eyes, skin irritant, all of this sort of stuff. But as Emily says, experts have repeatedly emphasised, including all of the trials and so on, that no traces of Bovir or the compounds contained within it would be found in milk or other produce because it is just broken down in the cow's stomach before it gets to our mouths.
I think you've said it there, experts. We are living in an age where if experts have decreed it's okay, suddenly TikTok, or a small percentage of TikTok, is up in arms because they don't like being told about things that experts have approved. And I think that kind of gets to the rub of it, that what you're hearing is, why are people putting this in our food without asking? Why are people forcing this upon us without, letting us know? And I think it ignores the fact that, frankly, we have had things added to our food and our water for decades and
Has
generations.
anyone looked at a can of Coke and what the ingredients are, or anything else for that matter?
I mean, it ties into the whole question of whether RFK, if he became the new health secretary in the US, would take fluoride out of water. One of the questions I was thinking about was chlorinated chicken, right? When we were talking about a trade deal with the US, one of the big questions was, we have higher standards of animal welfare here in the UK. Would we really accept chlorinated chicken from the US as part of a trade deal? And I went back and I checked to see what Nigel Farage of Reform UK thinks about chlorinated chicken. He's fine with that. It seems some things are fine. Some things can get through the net, and some things are Bill Gates.
But again, if you open this can of worms, or what's in the can
What are the additives in the can of worms?
Yeah.
You go to any supermarket and you look at the shiny red apples or the shiny green apples or the carrots that are all kind of a uniform sort of size and dimensions. That happens because there are pesticides that are normally put into the ground, that there is ways of growing things that maximise the yield and minimise deformities. If anyone who's grown vegetables in an allotment will know that they are worm-eaten and they've got, they go rotten and whatever else. Nothing like that is served in a supermarket because the food producers, big ag, makes strenuous efforts to ensure that this stuff is okay. And the idea that this is... what really strikes me is that conspiracy theories were once put around by people who didn't know anything and just were suspicious. These conspiracy theories are being started by people who know probably that what they're saying is utter bull. but know that the power of conspiracy theories in themselves is worth harnessing because they so distrust, and that's what they want to do.
We can break it down a little bit, right? Which is to say that, in fairness, there has long been concerns, often expressed actually by the political left, about quality of food. I mean, what organic farming, which has been a trend and craze since the 1980s. I mean, there will be people on the left who regularly shop organic. I mean, in this case, this additive might be added to organic food. It might not be. It would depend on the regulations involved. But there has long been concern about the quality of food. And big ag, John, yeah, okay, they make efforts, but big agriculture also gets stuff wrong. Yeah. And big agriculture often has been involved in scandals. Think about the horse meat scandal and so on. So I don't think that there is anything wrong with people questioning.
That's not agriculture. I mean, that was the importation of food.
But you get the food regulatory system has failed.
That was the labelling system,
yeah. But what my point is that the food regulatory system has failed. What I'm saying is I don't think we can be sceptical of people who, I think rightly, can be sceptical of institutions when they fail before and asking questions. I think there is a difference, though, when certain political actors do so, probably cognizant that there is nothing there because their entire politics rests upon a form of populism which requires all institutions, whether it is political, regulatory, economic, whatever they happen to be, which requires basically them to toxify the relationship between those institutions and voters, consumers, whatever it is. That is caustic, that is cynical.
I'm going to take you back to the mid-90s because some of our listeners will be aware of, but maybe not lived through, the BSE scandal, right? The mad cow disease, we used to call it. And there was a real concern there about the kind of way that industry standards had slipped to allow mad cow into a system. And at the time, what I remember was the Conservative right being very, very pro carrying on eating British beef. And that was the difference. It was a really interesting thing. I remember going out to dinner with Rodney Leach, who was a sort of big Brexiter and big supporter of Rodney Leach, who was a sort of big Conservative, very much somebody who I could imagine in a Reform Party nowadays. And everyone around the table was basically ordered, let's all have British beef to show that we're supporting the farmers. We're going to do this to support the farmers. It was a way of saying all those people talking about mad cow disease are kind of the crazies on the left who are trying to inject a fear and a suspicion about it. And the normal people, the people who get it and who want to support agriculture and farmers, would carry on eating British beef. You'll remember Lord
John Gummer.
John
Selden Gummer feeding his daughter Cordelia a
hamburger.
Yeah. And that was a sort
Lord Debon, he is now.
Yeah.
And it was
but he was agriculture minister at the time.
And it was a totemic, because she was about 4 or 5. She was quite young, wasn't she?
Yeah.
And he broke off a bit of burger and he was like, my daughter's eating the burger. Just get on with it. It's fine. We're all going to get through this. Stop being hysterical. But it now seems to me that the hysteria is coming from parts of what we used to call a sort of establishment, right?
Well, hold on, the huge difference is there was a major problem with British beef. I mean, mad cow disease was terrible, and it was bad practitioners who were responsible for it, which was feeding cows, which are natural herbivores, meat products as part of their feeding process. And that is what led to the kind of the whole cycle of it, and British beef being banned abroad because it was seen as so dangerous.
For decades in France,
yeah. And so there was a reason. That wasn't conspiracy. There was a reason. This is based on apparently nothing, and yet it's taken hold. And and the other thing about this, if we're going to do the anatomy of a conspiracy theory, which is I think what we're trying to do here, is that it's virtually impossible to stop it, because when you say, but experts say this is bull. They would say that, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Don't trust a bloody word they say.
There's a picture on TikTok of the world exploding, and next to it a picture of Bill Gates, and somebody saying, I used to think this was what evil looked like, the world exploding, and now I realise that this is what evil looks like, and it's Bill Gates.
But also, it goes back to exactly that wider populist kind of problem, which is that populists speak with complete clarity and certainty and very, very clearly. And then as soon as you start to get, and this is the problem we've seen with RFK and vaccines, which we can talk about, him being very sceptical of vaccines. And then as soon as scientists who come back and they say, yes, but this study shows this, and 96% of this study shows this, and then they'll say, well, what about the other 4%? So, well, of course, there's always scientific method. As soon as you get into the actual complexity of explanation,
asymmetry of message versus fact.
Well, exactly. As soon as you're explaining, you're losing, right? And that's the problem. And there is but I think this is part of a wider political shift, right, which we've seen. And we've seen most clearly in the United States, and the RFK thing comes into it. And perhaps we're starting to see the glimmers of here, which is one of the big fissures in modern politics has become the left, or becoming the sort of party of institutions, of scientists, of experts, of respect for all of those things. And the right increasingly treating those things in a way that is completely opposite to what they used to be, as being highly, highly skeptical of them. So you see, and that comes in the wake of, and I think this is interesting, and I think this is where kind of establishment, for want of a better word, scientific establishment, cultural establishment, whatever you want to call it, I think does have to ask questions, which is, why are people so receptive to this stuff? And are they more receptive than they used to be? And I think one of the reasons, to be fair, that they might be more receptive than they used to be, okay, we've got online social media which can disseminate this stuff, but in fairness, experts in different fields over the last 20 years have been delegitimized. If we go back to, say, the Iraq War and the experts who talked about foreign policy, WMD, wrong. No accountability. 2008, financial crisis, no accountability, experts leading up to it, completely wrong. There have been plenty of times where, let's be honest, experts, quote unquote, have been found wanting, and it has created the space, partly because sometimes those same experts, COVID as well, those same experts don't go back and have that conversation a bit more openly. It has created the space for people on the right, which I abhor this sort of politics, but it has created the space to allow people to fill this vacuum, and I think that is a problem.
Yeah, I mean that's the sort of story we've always told, obviously, about the financial crash allowing the populist right to grow. We understand that actually when you get things badly wrong, the space is filled by people, often bad actors, who want to say, look at what happened, look at what they did to us, look at here.
But people often haven't been punished for it. I think that's the problem, isn't it? It's that people haven't been punished for it. People have got things catastrophically wrong and haven't been punished for it as a result.
We've had plenty of scandals in this country, which obviously would lead people to say, I don't trust medicines because the blood scandal. Exactly.
Post office,
the post office, the Hillsborough, all the rest of it. We understand that people do have a problem with trust. I mean, broadly, what you're saying is they have a problem with trust in government. They have a problem with trust in institutions.
Exactly.
And we've seen that in the last year, particularly in 2024, because they've thrown out incumbent governments.
Let me anatomise another part of the conspiracy theory. We said earlier on in the podcast that this was sort of put out in a tweet by Rupert Lowe, the Reform MP for Great Yarmouth. We, of course, invited him on just because we wanted to understand what he thought was going on with Arla, what he knew about the science that made the rulings of the Food Standards Agency kind of wrong, and he's not available. So
to be fair, Reform are looking for somebody to talk about this. They haven't yet found anyone. We'd love to speak to them when we can.
But you can put it out on X.
Well, they're not accountable. You don't have to be accountable because you're not really in power.
And when we're just trying to say, explain why this fire has been started, we're finding it hard to get someone to come on to explain. Can I just add one thing, because it feels from Arla, which is we've had a statement from them as one of the biggest food producers in the UK. Arla Foods is committed to providing high quality dairy, and we would never compromise on the safety of our products. Bovar has been researched for 15 years and is currently used in 29 countries around the world. The science tells us that it is both proven safe for consumers and effective in reducing emissions.
Can I say one last thing? I think fundamentally what this comes down to, and you can take any single conspiracy theory and apply this, is the creation of an us and them. And I think that is critical. It's what we've always known about populism, which is the elites are telling you that we know this. They're trying to con you about this. We know this. Us and them. And I think this is another dividing line. We've seen it with 15-minute cities. They are trying to tell you can't go more than 15 minutes outside your house. No, they're not. They're trying to tell you that you can't eat meat again. No, they're not. But it's a way of dividing us and them. We are the people, and they have lost touch with reality.
I completely agree with that. I will just add one other thing, or two other things. One is that I think this is also part of a wider thing we're seeing on the right generally, which is a weird, slightly unexpected thing, which is like the right, the online right in particular, is like owning the wellness space, which is a really interesting thing. And we would not perhaps have anticipated that a few years ago. And RFK has been a big part of that. And the other element, I'll just build on what I was saying before, which is I think that, again, whilst abhorring this kind of appalling politics in so many ways, I do think that, I suppose, people like us and, you know, for whatever you want to call people like us, people in the media establishment, people who do not believe this stuff and want to debunk it, I do think we probably have to maybe shift our tone a bit. Because I think our tone previously, I would include myself in this, has been, you know, this is just crazy, this is mad. I think if we've learned anything from the Trump victory is the extent to which kind of people seem to basically think all establishment sources of power, whether it's media, science, politics, or whatever it is, are sort of part of a cabal that we're associated with these institutions and experts that they believe are in some way trying to mislead them. I think we have to really try and think about, particularly in the media, the way we take people with us and not just dismiss these concerns in that way, because they are real. And as I say, they build on worries which have long existed. And what we can't do is just dismiss them.
We can't dismiss them, but we can arch an eyebrow just ever so gently that when they posit themselves as the anti-elite and the us and them, and they are part of the us, the downtrodden, the marginalised.
I mean, this is the people who were worried about it.
Yeah, I mean, Rupert Lowe went to Radley College. He then independent boarding school, then works in the City of London for companies like Morgan Grenfell, Deutsche Bank and Barings. Went on to become a multi-millionaire businessman, owns Southampton Football Club, and becomes a member of the European Parliament. I mean, not exactly the most marginalised member of society, I'd say.
My worry is that stuff like this metastasises to what we see in the US, where, okay, if this doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. It'd be great to battle climate change, but it's one thing. If you start seeing stuff like this, or mainstream politicians, particularly maybe even within the Conservative Party, which I say we've not seen any sign of yet, but if this kind of like anti-science thing continues to kind of percolate and grow on the right, how long before we start to have a more mainstream conversation about vaccine skepticism? We already see what's happened in the US. Of RFK, possibly the most famous vaccine skeptic in the world, is about to become
that's why the
health
most important
secretary.
thing is, I think, the right language, and you're right, the right tone. But I think it is a shutting it down tone, because otherwise you get to the place where Keir Starmer was with the protests over the summer, where people who are attacking police officers, throwing bins, setting fire to hotels, are told, oh, well, yes, it's about time we had a conversation about immigration. No, that's not right. You stop the violence, you stop criminal behaviour, and then you have a chat about immigration. Otherwise you're into this whole new place where, you know, people are throwing milk down the sink, so now suddenly we've got to say, oh yeah, maybe you've got a point. I'm not sure that's the way to go.
I don't think it's about saying, maybe you've got a point. I think it's as much as anything, it's about the tone and explaining to people exactly why you think it is, and finding forms of language which are as equally accessible to the nonsense that these people are.
And the mainstream governments at the moment are not managing to do that.
And as we know, just saying experts say this probably ain't going to cut it, or at least it's not going to cut it enough.
We'll be back after the break.
Sure about Kemi?
Yeah, let's talk about Kemi. What did you think of PMQs?
I thought among a series of bad performances, this was Badenoch's worst yet. And it was her worst yet because she has left Westminster's collective head scratching, because she decided to, instead of going, for example, with a very live political issue where she can really buttress her base of political support, which is proving problematic for the government, i.e. farming, on a day where Whitehall has literally been filled with
tractors.
200 or so tractors blocking. By the way, it's funny, isn't it? The same people who have a go at Just Stop Oil for blocking roads off don't seem to have such a big problem with all the tractors outside Whitehall, but we'll leave that to one side. She could have gone with that because it is a big problem for the government politically. But instead she decided to do something, or go with a subject, which was a big problem for her government and her party politically, which was immigration, and tried to thread a very, very difficult kind of argument together, which was somehow that Keir Starmer's record was responsible for the Conservatives' failure on immigration. Listen to this.
He wants to talk about immigration. Let's talk about his record. We can talk about it all day. I have committed... Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister says he wants to talk about immigration. I have committed to a cap on migration. Why won't he?
Yeah, if I'm right, I don't think Labour have been in power that long that we can be talking at length about Labour's record on
What she's trying to do, I think, in the same way that Boris Johnson used to do it by calling him the lefty lawyer, was tie his record, not in office as Prime Minister for the last 4 months, but as the Director of Public Prosecutions.
But how can you make that case?
And to his actions as an MP. I think where she is right is not about the substance of anything that she's actually attacking him on, because, as we've said, 14 years is quite a long time to have a record of failure on one issue as important as immigration. But I think that she has worked out that you attack first, even if it's content light. And Starmer's problem is, going back to our sort of earlier discussion about the sort of asymmetry, he starts to explain what he is doing. I mean, he can legitimately point to, I was in Germany and this is why I'm working on a process that will help us stop the small boats. And I think in his head, he thinks this is a totally legitimate answer to be giving. In other words, he looks astonished that she doesn't understand and isn't welcoming the fact that he's talked to Germany about stopping immigration. But he lacks slightly the agility of language to hit first and explain afterwards.
Well, I think that's fine in a year's time. I think it's very, very difficult after 5 months. Because
you mean for her?
For her, yeah. Because all he has Starmer was not, as you say, the sort of most agile of performers anyway himself. But he can just fall back, at least for that time, on exactly what he did, which was talk about the Tories' record on this issue. And it reminded me a bit, and I think it really did encapsulate their problem. And I think Badenoch, louder and louder whispers about how she's struggling. It's a difficult job and she hasn't been doing it for very long. But how a lot of Conservatives are pretty unimpressed with what they've seen so far is that they had a spokesperson on Question Time a couple of weeks ago, and this exact question came up. And the line that they've adopted is, we made a mistake on immigration. We made a mistake. That's a really interesting line, because if you think about what the logic of that is, actually what it's really... They're saying that actually somehow in the last sort of 6 months, they've realised,
they've seen the light
and realised we shouldn't have let those people in the first place. It's a really good example, partly of what we were talking about before, of failure of governing parties to actually communicate properly with voters. Because what they really mean by that is this. We made a mistake because when we were in office, we actually had to deal with reality. We actually had to deal with the trade-offs that there were. We did have to take in hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians. We did have to take in hundreds of thousands of Hong Kongers. We did have to take in loads of people post-COVID in order to get inflation down in the wage supply chains. We did have to take in loads of people because we had lots of people going off sick post-COVID. These were real world issues. Now, if they'd chosen other options, or if they'd chosen not to allow those people in, that would have had political consequences. What they're really saying is that from the position of opposition, we are able to basically talk in simplistic terms to say that we made a mistake. The reality is that they're deciding to simply, they're not being straightforward with what they did.
I think it's much simpler than that. I think she is saying that my predecessors made a mistake because, as we've seen with Labour iterations in the past, she now feels in a place to slag off Johnson, to slag off Rishi Sunak, not by name but by implication, and say, I am the new look.
But she can't do that because she was in the cabinet.
She wasn't part of the immigration decisions, actually. And I think, we saw it with Ed Miliband, famously.
But she's not even saying that. If she was saying that would be fine.
Of course she's not saying it. She doesn't want to actually name people. But what she's essentially saying is, that was wrong. I'm the new look Tory.
The problem is, for her, in 4 years' time, what she said at Prime Minister's questions on any given day is not going to matter that much unless she commits the party to something absolutely crazy. I think to be attacking Labour's record on immigration when Labour have been the government for 5 minutes and the Tories have failed for 14 years is mad. But it's the other thing. It's do we overestimate the importance of Prime Minister's questions? Yeah, almost certainly. But it does matter in terms of morale of the Tory party. And you've got a new leader of the opposition
who's on the attack
and misfiring. And then people start saying...
But they don't think she's misfiring. They don't think she's misfiring.
Tories think they're misfiring.
Well, I don't know. I think there's plenty who think that she's punching properly. She's hitting him, where it hurts linguistically. She's managing to score, and they like just seeing somebody who's going for him.
But she's not scoring. Which PMQs has she scored at?
I think that she's not had in her own party as bad a start as you think. I think you've heard her in a slight sort of Labour tilted vacuum of like, oh, why is she talking about immigration?
No,
they just hear somebody. They just hear somebody who's going gangbusters, and they think she's pretty good at it.
I think that she hasn't been doing it for very long. That's certainly true, and it's a really, really tough job. And it's a really tough job to take over when you've just been kicked
also,
out of office.
I think it's really difficult to make the adjustment from having been in power and having, you know, ministerial advisors and all the rest of it that come with it, that kind of when you go to, you know, do questions in the Commons, to suddenly being opposition. You've got sparse resources and you're trying to kind of land a blow and you're not quite sure how you're going to do it. I think it's a bloody awful job being leader of the opposition.
It's terrible.
And all she can do is wonder, what am I going to say today, rather than what am I going to do today?
She's definitely scored against, or at least she started a good fight, not just with Labour, but with the Nigerian government, Kemi Badenoch, because Nigeria's vice president has launched an attack on Kemi Badenoch in response to her comments about Nigeria, where she spent most of her childhood. This was the Nigerian vice president, Kashim Shettima, talking today about Kemi Badenoch.
We are proud of her, in spite of her efforts at denigrating her nation of origin. She is entitled to her own opinions. She has even every right to remove the Kemi from her name. But that does not underscore the fact that the greatest black nation on earth is the nation called Nigeria.
That's in response to Kemi Badenoch's comments, which she invokes a lot and talks about that she, growing up in a socialist country, coming to Britain, that she felt she'd seen a country of failure. And the Nigerian vice president not approving of that.
Yeah, it's interesting that he would choose to acknowledge it and take her on, actually.
Yeah.
Because why, you know, if you're the vice president of Nigeria, why do you need to? I think what it speaks to is that Kemi Badenoch arouses strong emotions.
Yes.
On both sides. And those who love her fighting spirit and those who think she's just appalling.
Kemi Badenoch absolutely characteristically came out fighting against Nigerian vice president. She said, Kemi, or spokesperson for her, said, Kemi is not interested in doing Nigeria's PR. She is the leader of the opposition in the UK. Full stop.
We'll be back after the break.
Right, before we go, we just wanted to let you know about something that we're planning to do over Christmas, because next Friday will be our last...
I'm going to eat mince pies.
You're going to eat mince pies on the beach?
In New Zealand.
And Australia.
Oh, you're doing both?
Yeah.
Our Asia Pacific correspondent is really getting out there.
You've got to be out and about if you're going to be the Asia Pacific bureau chief.
Absolutely. Are you going to Tonga anytime soon?
Not yet.
Not yet. Next time. But over the Christmas New Year period, do not despair, because we will still be in your ears at least some of the time, planning a series of shows, doing something a little bit different, where we look back over recent-ish political history and ask whether it all might have turned out differently by looking at a particular moment when something might have happened or didn't happen, or what if, talking about what that might be. And we thought we could ask you if there are any kind of what if moments over the last, say, 10, 20 years which you'd like us to talk about, as to explain how history might have been different in the end.
We need you to indulge us a bit on this one, because obviously you can just go back and back and back to, well, what if they were never born? We're not going that far back. But you might take, for example, our kick-off one, which is, what would have happened if Bernie Sanders had been the nominee for the Democrats in 2016? How would history have played out differently then? But you tell us what you want to look at, and we'd love to get our teeth into that.
Turning points.
Drop us a voice note. We'd love that. newsagents@global.com. Or an email.
Or on social media.
Yeah.
Or however.
Yeah. Whatever you like.
Carrier pigeon.
Yes.
See you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.